I'm going to show you how to use Rough Animator, my pick for the best animation app on the iPad. Here's what Rough Animator looks like when it's first opened. You can see all of my projects that I've worked on, but let's create a new project. Here we can set the dimensions and the frame rate. Here's a new project. At the top, we've got a timeline, which works like most animation software. So far, we've got one layer and a background up here. Let's rename layer 1 to Roughs. And this rectangle here represents one frame. Our brush is already selected, so let's draw a circle for a classic bounce. We can create a new frame by clicking this button down here, and let's draw another circle. We can also select Add Drawing up here and select Duplicate Layer, which, you guessed it, duplicates that layer. And we can turn on onion skins down here to view a faded view of our previously drawn frame. We can edit this duplicated frame by selecting our lasso tool, making a rough selection around it, and this brings up a few transform tools that we can adjust its position, its scale, and its rotation as well. Let's make one more frame. And with our brush selected, let's go to Tool Options. Over here we can see our brush color, save any colors that are our favorites, and also eyedrop from our canvas as well. Here we can change the brush tip shape. There's a softer edge one. We can increase the brush size to see that a little bit more clearly. Let's zoom in. You can zoom in and rotate with a 2-finger pinch, and it kind of snaps to its regular view. There's also a textured brush as well, which is pretty nice, to get a nice gritty edge to your shapes. We've also got opacity, spacing, and smoothing options for our brush as well. And the option to select whether that brush draws in front, behind, or inside what's already on that current layer. And some onion skin options as well, so we can see how many onion skins we can view from our previous and upcoming frames. Let's zoom back out, and we can undo all of that with this button here and redo it as well. The eraser tool has the same features, and we've got a fill tool to fill in our shapes as well. Let's go back to this previous frame and fill in that circle. You'll notice we get this sort of horrific looking band of pixels on the fill though. So let's undo that, and we can stop that happening by increasing the fill expand to around 3 pixels. Now when we fill, we've got a nice clean edge. It's best to do a clean pass where we add the fill on another layer, so let's undo that as well. And fill blur will give us a softer fill as well. Not sure why you do that, but it's here if you do. And of course some options for tolerance and sampling. Let's go back and draw a few more frames to finish our bounce. Now that the bounce is heading back up, we can reuse some of these already drawn frames. So let's grab back to this frame, and here we can select Add Drawing, Duplicate After, which will create 2 instances of that frame here in the middle. To bring that to the end of our timeline, we click on this button up here, which swaps it with a frame to its right. So let's click that a few times. And this button here swaps it with a frame on the left. So now that a frame appears as we bounce up, and I'm going to do the same thing for the first few frames as well. Now we've got a bouncing ball. Here is our play button, so let's give it a watch. Wonderful. Definitely one for the show reel. And these buttons down here also let you go forward and backwards in the timeline. And this little slider can do that as well. We can also label our frames. This frame here is an extreme pose where it's at its lowest and most squashed. So I'm going to label that by clicking Drawing Label up here and selecting X. The first frame is an extreme pose as well, so let's do the same for that. And this is handy to do so you can quickly tell how many frames are in between them. So you can make sure that they're the right number, and you can also mark particular frames that might need redrawing or just keeping track of in your workflow. This is just how I use them. If you need to delete a drawing, you can click that up here and that gets rid of it. Thankfully, we can undo that. And if you want to edit multiple frames, you can click Edit Multiple up here. And that brings up this selection over the layer in our timeline. So we can drag that over the frames we want to edit. Let's edit these back 4 here. It'll show them all at once down here on our canvas. And from here, we can draw over all of them at once, or even select them and move them around. And when we press play, we can see that those back 4 frames all have this squiggle present, and they've all been moved up and a bit to the right as well. Let's undo that too. Over here in Modify Layers, we can choose to add an empty layer, duplicate that layer, and duplicate that layer timings on blank drawings. And let's select that. And what that does is creates a new layer with all our markings and the same number of frames of the layer we had selected, but these are all blank. And on this layer, let's rename that to Clean. I'm going to do a clean pass of this bouncing ball. The first thing I'll do is lower the opacity of this rough layer by sliding down this slider, selecting my brush. I might use a different color, and maybe increase the brush size too. And then draw a new circle using this roughs layer as a guide. Now that I've drawn the outlines, I'm going to go back in and use the fill tool to fill them all up. And then we've got our clean layer. You might notice during the playback, the resolution isn't quite as high. And it looks like there's some aliasing issues around the edges of our circle. Don't worry, that's only in the playback. When you export that, that is all fine. You can check and zoom in and you'll notice that it's all nice and clean. Also, layers that you don't have selected look a lot more rougher and low resolution as well. Our roughs look a bit more jagged here, but when we select our roughs layer, they look smooth and our cleans look rough. Just be aware, your actual animation, when it's rendered, will look fine. We can also use these arrows to change the order of our layers. So let's put our roughs on top. And we can also extend the duration of a frame by selecting it and just dragging it to the right. Now this frame holds for 3 frames. At the moment, we're set to independent, which means we can extend each layer independently. If we want these to sync up, we can click up here and select Sync Layers. That way, when we edit one, it edits all of our layers. Over here in this hamburger menu, we can also import images, import audio, and even import video. Change the frame rate, background, and even resize it. To export your video, click here, and here you can export as an H.264 MOV, GIF, or even a PNG sequence. Also, you can download a script from their website, which allows you to import the project directly into After Effects, which translates each of these layers into a separate comp. I made a short playlist of some related videos that I think you'll enjoy if you've made it this far. I'll see you in the next video, and please consider subscribing if you'd like more of these videos every week.